Okay, everyone. So June is in the books, and it was another pretty crazy month for me. 140,000 in gains, and really one of my most consistent months yet. I had 6 red days this month, but 4 out of those 6 were very, very small red days, super controlled. And the other two each had a little mistake in it, which I will definitely be sure to get into in this video. But just focusing on the gains for a second, 140,000, I mean, that blows May out of the water. And I mean, it's expected that my months will get a little bit bigger if the market stays active and if I keep on increasing my risk. But it feels good to be back at this level. I probably sounded pretty silly back in January, February when I was complaining about 10, 20, $30,000 months. But those complaints, I mean, it didn't come from a lack of gratitude or a lack of appreciating what I had. It just was that back in my mind, I knew this is what was possible eventually. I mean, I had been here before. Granted that in late 2014, early 2015, I had kind of been doing it the wrong way by getting stubborn and getting lucky at times by not having more crazy blowout losers. But I knew that if I did fix the discipline, cut out the big losses, I could get back to this level and possibly even be better than I was before. So it feels good to finally see that kind of coming together a little bit. And really, the last few months, I mean, the biggest change for me between March and now, I mean, yeah, size has gone up a little bit, but my trading overall, I feel like I'm trading much, much better. This patience approach that I started in April, where I'm starting to swing a lot more short and really give some of these trades a chance to work and not worry so much about my profit loss and just getting out to take gains. I mean, that's gone a long way for me. So hopefully the market can stay active, and I'm going to try to keep myself in this mindset where I'm worried less about profit loss and more worried about trading the chart, trading what I see in front of me, and trying to capture as much of the move as I can before I think I see momentum shifting. But besides the $140,000 month, one other thing that was pretty cool this month was crossing a big milestone. I did finally cross $3 million in profits on my Profitly chart here. I had been stuck for a while. We talked about that a couple months ago, how I was just stuck in that 2.6, 2.7 area and really didn't have any growth for a while, partially because I kept taking sloppy losers, partially because then I sized down and was taking my time to kind of ingrain discipline in myself and slowly build back. But I finally have broken to the upside here. I got past my peak at 2.83 million back right before I took my huge PBMD loss last May. And I've just kind of been off and running since then. So always fun to cross a milestone, and something that I always like to take a second and just kind of reflect upon. It's one of those things you can't really do outside of the trading community, because I'm not going to go up to random friends in town and be like, oh, hey, I just made my $3 millionth in net profit loss, all before tax, of course. But, you can't talk to normal people on the street about this. So it's always kind of cool just to have a second to think about it, given the appropriate channels. It's basically been about 4.5 years of full-time trading now, little over 5 years since I placed my first trade. And, I traded part-time for that first 6 months or so. But I certainly didn't set out looking for this kind of success or forcing things or trying to make this happen. It's just all been kind of a product of slow, steady, natural growth. And that all came first from achieving consistency. I mean, I remember back when a big win for me was $100. So, I mean, you might see these big numbers from me and you might see me succeeding in the markets like we're having right now. Don't feel like there's something wrong with you if you're not posting these kinds of numbers, if you're not even having green months right now. I mean, you're at a different part of your journey than I am. We all start somewhere, and what you need to focus on is month-to-month progress for you, not comparing yourself to others and where they're at. That was a huge challenge for me back when I was first starting, where I'd have a $500 day. And I mean, for me at the time, that was absolutely great. But then I'd see someone like Nate or someone like Tim posting, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 of profits. And then all of a sudden it'd be like, oh, well, crap, this isn't that good after all. And you just need to stay away from that kind of mindset. Again, focus on you, focus on where you're at, focus on your own progress, because really it's your story that matters, not where you stack up compared to others. So as nice of a month as it was, and as nice of a run as I've been on lately, unfortunately it was not a mistake-free month again. I did have a few slip-ups. And the first of those slip-ups was HMNY, which wound up being my worst loss of the year. HMNY was a massive runner from $1 up to $10 before kind of fading off into the closing around 720 or so. And the next morning it was gapping down. So it opened up and had some morning push, and I just started shorting into that push. And that day I was kind of just like hungover on Advil or something. I don't really know what was going on with me. I had hurt myself in softball the night before, but I just had absolutely no plan in mind. I just took a really lazy approach to this trade, and I got really burned for it because what I did was I just started shorting 1,000 shares at a time and building in. And I didn't know what I was building into. I didn't know what risk level. I didn't have any kind of plan in mind. I was just kind of like, okay, well, it's having a morning push. I'm just going to short into it. And eventually it will peak and it will pull back and I'll be okay. And that was about the extent of my planning. So I was just in a fog that day or something. I don't know what was wrong with me. But all of a sudden, it just ripped. And I mean, it got through green. It just sped up. It kept going and going. And I only took off a little bit into the dip because, again, I got into that kind of hold and hope mode where I said, okay, even though the pain is less now, I'd love it if this just faded off all day. And I kind of was thinking more about what I hoped would happen than what actually did. I did have about 6,000 shares short from, gosh, my average must have been 7, maybe even a little bit less. And I only covered 1,000 of it into the pullback. And then it eventually ramped back up, broke high a day. And as it broke high a day and then was breaking past 10, that was where I just stopped out of everything, which it's a good thing I did because it ran up as high as $17 eventually. But it was a painful trade. It was very painful to stop out of. And it cost me about $16,500. But one thing with HMNY that I'm really proud of is the fact that, again, I followed my golden rule, and my new golden rule, we've talked about this in months past, is that I am not adding to a stock that is outside of my plan or outside of my risk level. So despite myself getting squeezed up on this, I never tried to fight it. I never tried to build in with new risk of $9 or new risk of $10 and turn that loser into a winner. So as bad as the loss was, it could have been, 2 or 3 times worse if I had traded this like I would have in the old days. And what this opened the door for was one of my biggest wins of the year so far. Because later on the backside of the move for HMNY, after it had spiked up to 17, after it was starting to show some lower highs, some signs of reversal, I was able to build into a short again. And I wasn't emotionally exhausted like I would have been in years past. I hadn't taken way too big of a loss to recover from. And I built into my short in the 14s and wound up covering it. I think the average was somewhere in the 10s where I wound up getting out. And the end result was a $21,000 gain. So it was bigger than my loss. And like I said, in the old days for me, this would have been unthinkable. I mean, the old ones where I twisted myself, like LAKE, PBMD, CANF, all of those huge front side losses on the shorts, I was never able to come anywhere close to recovering that loss when the backside finally set in. So this was actually a really big moment for me as a trader. The first time where I can sort of say, hey, I didn't fight this. I didn't dig my heels in. Yeah, I made a stupid mistake on the front side. Yeah, I was early. But then I just took the trade off and I kept myself in a position where I could get it back and then some in this case. So, I mean, that certainly isn't meant to say that the sloppiness is okay or to excuse it. But the point is, I made a mistake and I was able to recover from it for once. And that's really exciting to me. But back to the bad for a minute. Now, that HMNY loss, that did kind of leave a bad taste in my mouth that day. And like I so often do, I did come back and make another mistake the next day as a result. I was actually having a pretty good day. And BSPM popped up. And I mean, this was during a week where just everything low float, was running that could. And BSPM had this huge run up to $5 and then started to fade off. It had cracked down, had a little bit of a bounce and fail at the 420 area or so. And it caught my eye. And I had seen so many of these that after they had their initial spike, they just faded off all day. And I took another lazy trade. I took a very lazy trade on BSPM because I just shorted 5,000 shares around $4 and just basically had the plan of, it's going to fade off all day. I'll just cover it into the fade. And then instead, it completely surprised me. It ripped. It flew through high a day, and I was forced to stop out at high a day. So, I mean, I did stop out, but I played it too big given my risk level, and I wound up with about a $6,000 loss, so double what it should have been. And again, that just really boils down to laziness and just thinking like, the trade's going to work and having no plan if it doesn't. I still at least stopped out. It turns out I could have probably been out for break even later, but I'm never going to worry about that. I'm not going to put myself in a position where it's going to be the 1 out of 100 that goes to $20 and then I'm screwed. Just point being, it was overall very lazy. very poorly thought out, and I'd been having a nice green day up to that point and kind of shot myself in the foot, and I ended the day slightly red as a result. But aside from those two hiccups early in the month, I was pretty damn close to perfect the rest of the way. I did not have any more stubborn losers. I got a lot more careful about forming my plans, thinking about what I was doing. And my losses for the rest of the month were all very, very small, very insignificant compared to my gains. Really, no rules broken whatsoever. I did take one more loss that was above my $3,000 limit, and that was on AMCO. And this was kind of a combination of my fault versus just kind of dumb bad luck. And what happened with AMCO was it was this cheap stock, about 30 cents, only a 6 million share float. So I thought it was pretty low float. It was breaking past its highs of the day. And I just thought it was a potential runner. I thought maybe it could catch a trend, start getting more volume going, and really get some squeeze. So I bought in on the 30-cent break. And then later in the day, it had this crazy little ramp up on air, shot up to almost 40. So I added into that dip, and I had about 80,000 shares long overnight, thinking next day maybe it could gap up and run. And I traded this in my Fidelity account. I've got a Fidelity 401k. It's a Roth 401k, so that's why I'm trading it there, is because it's tax-free. And so I accumulated this in Fidelity, but the fills were just crap. And I knew it getting in. I really did. I have no excuse here because I could see it. Despite being a listed stock, I would have an order in above the best offer, and the order would just be sitting there, not filling, which really was puzzling to me. So I knew this getting in. I saw this problem getting in, and I still just bought too many shares because the next morning, when it wasn't opening strong like I wanted, when it actually gapped down slightly and I was trying to sell, the same thing happened. My sell orders were just sitting there. I was trying to smack the bid, but I wouldn't get a fill. And I don't know why that happens from time to time in Fidelity. I mean, it really shouldn't. Any other broker, I'm going to get an instant fill there. But it cost me in this case. And then I just got a little bit too picky about trying to, play games with it and wait it out and get out into pops. And again, just every time I would try to fill, I just couldn't. It was awful. So I wound up selling a bunch down near 26 and then some more as it cracked under 26. And I just got out way later than I should have, way later than I would have under normal circumstances. So, I will take the blame for this. This is more my fault. I would call it more stubbornness and poor planning. The fact that I traded 80,000 shares on a stock where I really was not getting good executions. That's what happens. If you don't have the ability to get in and out, you're setting yourself up to fail. So it was a little bit of a sloppy end of the month for me, and it left kind of a bad taste in my mouth. And that's why the last couple days of June, I really kicked it into low gear, and I was more trying to take time off and relax and get my mind right, because I've been in this spot before where I kind of can tell, okay, I did something stupid, maybe I'm feeling a little bit burned out, and usually I have all these warning signs and I'm ignoring them, and then I take a big loss. So this time I really, just forced myself to get out of the way a little bit, be happy with the good month I was having, and not put myself in that position where I might take a big loss. So I enjoyed the long weekend and I came back refreshed, and now hopefully that's all in the rearview mirror. One more trade I'll get into really quick, which was my biggest trade of the month, my second biggest of the year next to MGT, is VMRI. And I've got to take a second to talk about VMRI because this was one of the better OTC pumps we've seen in a really long time. And it was just fun to have an opportunity to trade one of these again. I had taken a couple small losses on VMRI on the 23rd and 24th because even then it had run something like 5 straight days up from about 80 cents to $1.70. And then it had a red day. So that 23rd, when it had that first red day, I was trying to short. The 24th, I was also trying to short because it had gapped down. And I was thinking, okay, pump and dump, red day, probably just fades back off towards 1. And instead, it kept holding up. It kept on supporting the 135 area. And I really didn't trade it that well those days. I probably could have done a little bit less damage if I'd been a little bit less impulsive. I hit weakness a few times. I covered strength a few times. But they still were small losses. And then it had the big breakout past 170, and I actually longed that. And I didn't hold it for long. I was out in the low 2s, but still, I recognized the breakout. I didn't let myself get crazy squeezed on the short side. And that first day of squeeze on breakout was up to about a 270 high, and it closed in the 260s. So the next morning, that was my top watch by far. I mean, it's a pump that's getting way extended, and it gapped up and spiked through 3. And so as it was spiking through 3, I was watching the level 2, just trying to judge where it might be turning. And I started in a little bit aggressively on the front side. I started in at about 320. I only had about 5 or 10,000 shares short at that point. And then once it was pretty clear that 343 had topped out, once we were starting to see lower highs, I started building in more. And I started adding to my position, adding to the winner. And by the time it was cracking its low day, by the time it was starting to head red, I had 25,000 shares short from roughly 316, I want to say. That was my average, somewhere in there. And just had this fantastic panic down into the twos and even below, but I didn't make it past the low twos. I'm trying to judge the turns based off of level 2. And at a certain point, when the stock is panicked $1.20 already and it starts to turn and look like it's going to bounce, you've got to start thinking about paying yourself. So I saw the turn in the low twos and I covered up most of my shares in the 220s. And then by the time I realized that it was stuffing the bounce attempt and I was trying to add my shares back on and reshort them, I just couldn't get executed. It had gotten too weak too fast. It wasn't the most liquid of charts, so it was definitely a little tough to fill. And that's why part of the reason, too, I was being a little more aggressive with trying to get out was because I didn't want to wind up sitting through a big bounce opportunity with all my shares. So I covered up most of my shares near 220. I got out the rest in the 190 area. But this was just classic OTC pump and dump, classic parabolic chart collapsing on its first red day. And yeah, I know that right now the state of pump and dumps are awful and we really don't see that many anymore and they're not that great. But man, when they come around, it's just money lying in the street waiting to be picked up. So you can knock on the OTC market all you want for being slower lately. I mean, I'm right there with you. I wish that it was more active. But it's definitely a skill set worth knowing and understanding how to short these things when they do get crazy extended and ready to collapse. So just to wrap up quickly by taking a look at my updated annual stats here, you'll notice some changes from last month. I'm not going to read them all off and tell you everything that's changed, but just take a look. And again, the thing that I most want to focus on and the thing that I'm most proud of is the fact that these ratios are holding as far as biggest wins compared to biggest losses. Years past, one loser would wipe out my biggest 5 gains. And this year so far, my number 5 gain is bigger than my number 1 loser. So these ratios are much better, much more on the right side for me. And my goal is to keep it like this. I want to keep it here. So 6 months into the year, I'm doing a good job with this. And I've really got these losers under control so far compared to what it used to be. Even though, it's funny that I can say that, even though I did just make my biggest and dumbest mistake of the year so far on HMNY, and that I did take that $16,000 loss. But at the same time, I mean, if this was last year or if this was 2014, I probably try to fight that and I probably lose 100 grand. So I will absolutely take 16 grand compared to that scenario because it was just, financially awful and emotionally awful in the past. And one last thought here, just going into July, I am staying at $3,000 risk. Even though I had a pretty good month, very consistent in terms of following my rules and only a couple slip-ups, I am noticing a little bit of a mental block with me right now where the idea of taking a $3,000 loss still is not comfortable to me. And I don't want to keep pushing size when I'm not comfortable with where I'm at because that's a great way to get stubborn. So I'm going to go one more month here at 3,000. I'm going to try to get a little more comfortable with having to stop out for full-size losses. And once that gets a little more comfortable to me, then it's time to just go onwards and upwards again. But hopefully July is a nice disciplined month. Hopefully I can wrap my mind around that $3,000 risk a little bit more. And hopefully the markets stay as active as they have been because it's been a lot of fun lately. So thank you all for tuning in. I hope your trading month was great also. And if not, you know what? Just learn from the mistakes you made and use that to make yourself better. A red month doesn't have to be pointless. Win or lose, take whatever lessons you can from the trade and just use it to make yourself better next time. Thanks, guys.